Reading from the book Swamiji and His Message by Sister Nivedita. Om Namah Sri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suray Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Shamine Tapaharine. We were reading from the second chapter, Golden Memories. I am continuing from that onwards. Another day, coming at sunrise, when the snows could be seen, dawn lighted from the garden. It was Shiva and Uma, on whom he dwelt, and that was Shiva up there, the white snow peaks, and the light that fell upon him was the mother of the world. For a thought on which at this time he was dwelling much was that of God is the universe, not within it or outside it, and not the universe God or the image of God, but He it and the all. We sat working on Friday morning. The telegram came a day late that said, Goodwin died last night at Otakumund. Our poor friend had, it appeared, been one of the first victims of what was to prove an epidemic of typhoid fever. And it seemed that with his last breath he had spoken of the Swami and longed for his presence by his side. June 5. On Sunday evening, the Swami came home through our gate and over the terrace. His way brought him, and there we sat and talked with him a moment. He did not know our news, but a great darkness hung over him already, and presently he broke the silence to remind us of that saint who had called the cobra's bite's messenger from the Beloved, one whom he had loved second only to Sri Ramakrishna himself. I have just, he said, received a letter that says, Pavhari Baba has completed all his sacrifices with the sacrifice of his own body. He has burnt himself in his sacrificial fire. Swami exclaimed. Someone from among his listeners, wasn't that very wrong? How can I tell, said the Swami, speaking in great agitation. He was too great a man for me to judge. He knew himself what he was doing. Very little was said after this, and the party of monks passed on. Not yet had the other news been broken. June 6, next morning. He came early in a great mood. He had been up, he said afterwards, since 4, and one went out to meet him and told him of Mr. Goodwin's death. The blow fell quietly. Some days later, he refused to stay in the place where he had received it, and complained of the weakness that brought the image of his most faithful disciple constantly into his mind. It was no more manly, he protested, to be thus ridden by one's memory than to retain the characteristics of the fish or the dog. Man must conquer this illusion and know that the dead are here beside us and with us as much as ever. It is their absence and separation that are a myth. And then he would break out again with some bitter utterance against the folly of imagining personal will to guide the universe. As if, he exclaimed, it would not be one's right and duty to fight such a god and slay him, and for killing Goodwin. And Goodwin, if he had lived, could have done so much. On the way to Kathgodam, June 11, on Saturday morning we left Almora. It took us 2 days and a half to reach Kathgodam. How beautiful the journey was! Dim, almost tropical, troops of monkeys, and the ever wondrous Indian night. June 14, we entered the Punjab next day, and great was the Swami's excitement at the fact it almost seemed as if he had been born there, so close and special was his love for this province. He talked of the girls at their spinning wheels, listening to the Soham Soham, I am he, I am he. Then by a swift transition, he turned to the far past and unrolled for us the great historic panorama of the advance of the Greeks on the Indus, the rise of the Chandragupta, and the development of the Buddhistic empire. He was determined this summer to find his way to Attock and see with his own eyes the spot at which Alexander was turned back. He described to us the Gandhara sculptures which he must have seen in the Lahore Museum the year before, and lost himself in indignant repudiation of the absurd European claim that India had ever sat at the feet of Greece in things artistic. Then there was flying glimpses of long expected cities, Ludhiana, where certain trusty English disciples had lived as children, Lahore, where his Indian lectures has ended, and so on. We came too upon the dry gravel beds of many rivers, and learned that the space between one pair was called the Doab, and the area containing them all the Punjab. It was at twilight, crossing one of these stony tracks, that he told us of the great vision which came to him years ago while he was still new to the ways of the life of a monk, giving back to him, as he always afterwards believed, the ancient mode of Sanskrit chanting. It was evening, he said, in that age when the Aryans had only reached the Indus. I saw an old man seated on the bank of the great river. Wave upon wave of darkness was rolling in upon him, and he was chanting from the Rig Veda. Then I awoke and went on the chanting. There were the tones that were used long ago. Shankaracharya, he was saying, had caught the rhythm of the Vedas' national cadence. Indeed, I always imagine, he went on suddenly with dreamy voice and faraway look, I always imagine that he had some vision, such as mine when he was young, and recovered the ancient music that way. Anyway, his whole life's work is nothing but that, the throbbing of the beauty of the Vedas and Upanishads. He had a surpassing love for Mahadeva, and once he said of the Indian women of the future that if, amidst their new tasks, they would only remember now and then to say Shiva, Shiva, it would be worship enough. The very air of the Himalayas was charged for him with the image of that eternal meditation that no thought of pleasure could break. And he understood, he said, for the first time this summer, the meaning of the nature story that made the Ganga fall on the head of the great god and wander in and out amongst his matted locks before she found an outlet on the plains below. He had searched long, He said, "For the words that the rivers and waters fall uttered amongst the mountains," before he had realized that it was the eternal cry, "Bom Bom Hara Hara." Yes, he said of Shiva one day, "He is the great God, calm, beautiful, and silent, and I am his great worshipper." Another time, the talk was of Genghis Khan, the conqueror from Central Asia. "You hear people talk of him as a vulgar aggressor," he cried passionately, "but that is not true. They are never greedy or vulgar, this great soul. He was inspired with the thought of unity, and he wanted to unify his world." Yes, Napoleon was cast in the same mold, and another Alexander, only those three, or perhaps one soul, manifesting itself in three different conquests. Thank you. Jai Swamiji.